Hey, I'm Brian Stelter. Welcome to our viewers in the United States and around the world. This is Reliable Sources, our weekly look at the story behind the story, of how the media really works and how the news gets made. Ahead this hour, in the aftermath of the tragedy in Las Vegas, how is the NRA using the media to shape the gun debate? Plus, we'll have a rare look inside the Washington Post with editor Marty Barron. And we'll have the latest on the Harvey Weinstein scandal, with Weinstein taking a leave of absence after numerous allegations of sexual harassment were published in the New York Times. Why did it take so long for these allegations to come to light? We'll get into that. But first here, this was Moron Week, right? Moron, the word of the week. We see President Trump renewing his war against the media with his overuse of his favorite phrase, or shall I say his favorite slur, fake news. You remember how he started the week tweeting about fake news and politically motivated ingrates when it came to coverage of Puerto Rico and the ongoing crisis there. He then retweeted attacks against MSNBC and other members of the media, from Sean Hannity and Bill O'Reilly. And later in the week, he went back to this fake news idea in a big way. This was due to the report by NBC News that Secretary of State Rex Tillerson was on the verge of resigning over the summer. Of course, Tillerson pointedly did not deny that he called President Trump a moron in a conversation at the Pentagon. That news story from NBC and the confirmation from CNN and other outlets really driving the political news cycle for days. We've seen even more fake news tweets from President Trump as a result. At one point, even suggesting that maybe the Senate Intel Committee, which is looking into Russian interference, should instead look into American networks, what he calls fake news networks producing made-up stories. Let's separate fact from the president's fiction now with April Ryan, a correspondent and Washington bureau chief for American Urban Radio Networks, also a CNN political analyst. Another CNNer, Brian Karem. He's the White House correspondent for Playboy magazine and executive editor at Sentinel newspapers. And here with me in New York, Joanne Littman. She's the editor-in-chief of USA Today and the chief content officer at Gannett. Welcome to all of you. April, first to you, take me through all these fake news critiques this week. Is it true for when President Trump, when the going gets tough for President Trump, the news gets fake in his mind?
You've hit the nail squarely on the head, Brian. What really happens is the fact that this president is trying to create a positive spin when all chaos is happening, and he doesn't want the nation to know. So then, therefore, we are fake. It's been 9 months. This president either doesn't still understand or doesn't want to know the dynamic of the press, particularly the White House correspondents who are embedded in that White House. And this has been going on for president after president after president after president. We are baked into the framework of this nation. And the president, when he doesn't like it, he lashes out. And I'm just thinking about what he said to Sarah Huckabee's dad in an interview, talking about the hate that goes against Sarah Huckabee Sanders in that briefing room. I'm just thinking about everything, wanting to investigate the press. We are doing our job. We're getting all sides, and he just doesn't like the facts that are coming out, even from his own party and within his own inner circle.
He's the chaos.
To that point about the investigation, Brian, do you think he actually wants the Senate Intel Committee to actually investigate news networks, or is he just venting, just blowing off steam?
I think he's punking us. I think he's trolling us.
Punking us.
Everything that he says is all about look this way, don't look that way. For example, earlier this week he said, this is the calm before the storm. Anybody who's been covering the White House knows there has been no calm. There's only been storm, so we knew he was trolling us from the very beginning. His tweets are that way when he talks about the fake press and the fake news media. What April said about chaos, he is the chaos. He likes to promote chaos. There's nothing other than that, than the promotion of chaos. And nobody hates on Huckabee Sanders. Nobody hates the woman. What we want, as I asked her earlier this week, she made a very valid point. We are responsible to give you vetted facts and the truth when possible. But is not the White House responsible for the very same? And who's fallen down more, us or them? I would submit to you that they've been nothing but blue smoke and mirrors since they walked into the Oval Office. They continue to be such, and anything they can do to keep you from looking and focusing on their foibles is what they'll do. So they hate everybody that's not them, and
who's they? You say the White House aides?
The White House. I think the White House, the entire administration, is focused with Donald Trump at the apex of that, focused on dissuading you from looking. It's much like don't look at the man behind the curtain. Who are you going to believe? Your lying eyes or me? And they want you to believe them.
I want to come back to the briefing dynamic in a moment, but,
Sure.
but first, Joanne, as a news executive, someone who runs a media company, do you take these kind of comments serious from the president when he says maybe the Intel Committee should investigate fake news networks, or he said yesterday maybe there should be equal time for me on television? Is that a threat to the free press, or is it just, is it something you just roll your eyes at?
So the first thing to know about Donald Trump, I covered him as a reporter, and he was a real estate developer.
Mm-hmm.
He was not the wealthiest, nor did he have the most buildings, but what he did have was a singular ability to market himself, and we saw it when he went on The Apprentice and created You're Fired, and we've seen it now. We saw it with Crooked Hillary. And so fake news has become one of the memes, and so it's really more about him and his ability to create these memes. In terms of the threat to the press, look, the press, it is essential that we keep our eye on the ball, right? I oversee USA Today, as well as the USA Today Network, which is 109 local publications like the Arizona Republic and the Cincinnati Enquirer and the Des Moines Register. And it's essential to us that we keep our eye on what is the news, right? What is the essential truth here? So, we've got people now in Puerto Rico covering the storm. When we get into these issues of the press, of this, palace intrigue and about them, was he called a moron or wasn't he called a moron? I mean, frankly, the issue there is really, is there discord in our administration, and what does that mean for the people of America? What does that mean for our allies, and what does it mean for our enemies? And we really need to keep our eyes focused on that.
The president repeatedly denied the thrust of that NBC story. We can put the headline back on screen because this story really drove the news cycle for a couple of days. He repeatedly denied it, suggested it was made up. So how are viewers supposed to evaluate the information they read or see on a story like from NBC or from CNN, which was matching a lot of this reporting? If it's all based on confidential sources, what should we believe?
So we have extremely strict rules about the use of confidential sources and try our utmost not to use confidential sources. There are times when that is the only way to get important, relevant information. So when you use a confidential source, there are a few, the bar is very high. First of all, your confidential source needs to have direct knowledge of the incident. This cannot be hearsay or rumors or third hand. Secondly, when you do hear from a confidential source, then it is the onus is on the reporter to then go and do reporting all around that, to be able to check every possible angle to make sure if this person said this was said at a meeting. Well, you better make sure that there was a meeting. You better make sure you know who was in the meeting. You better make sure you've contacted those in the meeting, right? So the bar is very, very high. And I did see, the NBC, I'm not privy to NBC, but they did say they spoke to something like a dozen more
sources, yeah.
Sources, yes.
I mean, that gets to this question, Brian, of who do you trust? Do you trust Tillerson on the record saying I wasn't going to quit? Or do you trust these dozen confidential sources that are all telling NBC and CNN and other outlets the same thing?
Well, a couple of things in regard to what Joan was saying is too. Look, first of all, I don't like to use confidential sources. Now, I've gone to jail for using a confidential source, but no one in the press uses them as if you're chewing bubble gum or candy. This is a very serious thing. So I trust the people that they interviewed, and I trust the bar, which is set very high. But I also think that in regards to what Donald Trump said this week regarding the press, you have to stay focused on what the administration is doing, but at the same time, you must keep your eye on what he's doing with the press, because if it ever ventures over into real action against the First Amendment, then we have to react to that. And that's a very tough row to hoe for us. We're walking a very middle path, trying to do our job, while at the same time making sure that we can do our job. So at the end of the day, yes, I trust the sources because I know what you have to go through in order to get that information. And Donald Trump's denial doesn't mean much to me. I haven't been able to see anything that he's tweeted or said in public that I've been able to verify as 100% accurate since he's been in office.
Brian, April, you're both regulars at the briefing. I went to one of the briefings this week, and I was struck by how it was even more tense in the room than it looks on television. On TV, it can be awkward sometimes. There's some aggressive questioning, as there should be. But in the room, it's even more aggressive. It's even more tense. April, has it always been that way, or is that new in the Trump era?
It depends on the moment in time, and this is a moment where there is tension, and yes, you were there, and we even had a conversation after the briefing, and I remember that day. The question is, and why there's tension, is it fact that they're giving us or they're just spinning us? We want to know the truth. And sometimes we don't feel that the truth is coming out. And there is a bit of tension. In the past, Brian, you know, it all depends upon the moments. You know, I've been there from the second term of the Bill Clinton era. And, you know, I remember times of Katrina. I remember times of Monica Lewinsky. I remember times of war.
It was tense.
I remember tense times. But for the last 9 months, from the day that Sean Spicer walked out into that briefing room talking about the crowd size, we knew that information was skewed one way or not delivered accurately or truthfully. So there is a concern, and when we leave that room, most times it's like we shake our heads because, and I hate to say shake our heads, but we shake our heads sometimes because we know it's not necessarily the way it's happening, because we're hearing from inside the inner circle. We're hearing from Republicans who supported this president who are saying this is not the fact.
And we see it.
Yeah, you see it,
I
you hear
even
it, you
heard,
smell it.
I remember hearing a couple of chuckles in the briefing room when Sanders said, the president is a tremendous advocate for the First Amendment.
Yes.
A couple reporters
As
couldn't
he
help
calls
but
us
laugh
enemies, enemies of the American
state.
public, the opposition party. I mean, you know, he's labeled some of us, even here on CNN, as enemies of the administration and thwarting his agenda, which we're not. We're just reporting, telling the truth, giving the facts.
If
you all
him
could all
trying
stick
to
around, I want to bring you all back right after a quick break here, because there's a new interview the president gave with one of his friends, Mike Huckabee. He defended this scene in Puerto Rico, tossing out those paper towel rolls. We're going to ask, why hasn't the president sat down for an actual TV news interview in 5 months?